Well, there's never the best of times to discuss mental health and minding our minds. And tonight is one of those nights. In the past few weeks, a number of deaths by suicide has been reported extensively in the press. Both famous and regular folk are experiencing a hard time for sure. Now, health professionals tells us we should seek help anytime we feel life's pressures are weighing us down. With all due respect tonight, we want to find out if the current political times are any contributing factor to our general mental health. Some numbers to contextualize tonight's program. 1 in 4 people in Kenya are living with mental illness. Kenya is the 4th country in Africa with the highest number of cases and 9th globally. And only 13% of health facilities in the country offer mental health services, while 5 in 6 persons living with mental illness don't receive the treatment that they so desperately need. Tonight, on the panel is Gathoni Mbogwa, a clinical psychologist, Chiromo Hospital Group. Karibu to the program.
Thank you.
Danish Odongo, founder Wellness Tribe.
Asante sana.
I don't know how many members it has. And obviously, Linette Temesi, panel guest tonight, founder the Mental Wellness Project Africa.
Thank you so much.
Welcome all to the program.
Asante.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's start where we should. And with this, it appears that every time, we get into sort of like a season, where mental health becomes a thing when, some deaths by suicide are reported or happens to happen to celebrities or things like that. And we appear to be one of those. And one of the key questions that we've seen and people asking is, since we go to this as a political year, is it the fact that some things happen to us politically and economically as a country could be a contributing factor to what we're experiencing? Let's start with you.
Thank you for having me. First of all, let me start by saying that you said it's a season. I would like to disagree with that. I genuinely feel that people have been suffering from mental health issues for a very long time. And it's not that, well, the political atmosphere is genuinely can be a contributing factors, but there are also other contributing factors. Since the onset of the pandemic, we actually saw a rise in the number of cases, both of suicide and homicide, but also incidences of mental illnesses. And that came about, number one, by individuals being isolated. So as Africans, actually, we are a culture that has a lot of, oneness and celebrations, and all these cultural practices. So being put in a space where you can no longer attend church, you can no longer attend the mashakayas, the wake that would do. I mean, that kind of social isolation is really detrimental to mental health. On top of that, there's a total disruption of the economic state, finances, there are no jobs. This is also a country that employment, even before the pandemic, was an issue.
Yeah.
So you can just imagine how much more stressful that was for a lot of people. And being a third world country, that was also worse because we are not really in a space where a lot of individuals have, let's say, enough resources that they have put away or enough liquid cash that they have put away to contribute, to set themselves, to have that safety net, per se. So the social isolation, the financials, and then initially people would have an outlet, when you look at a home environment, the setup is in the morning, you'll go to work and you'll go to school. But now we're
locked in.
Exactly,
right.
We are locked in. That's when you start realizing, oh my God, this is what happens, with the kids. Or these are the things that I've been avoiding to address with my partner because there is no, way out. So all these personality clashes also, come into place. That also makes the situation really intensified and poor coping mechanism. Yeah. So there was also an increase in the number of people abusing alcohol. And initially, probably people would go somewhere, but now it's from the comfort of your space. You're likely to, indulge more.
I see.
Yes.
Danish, do you feel the same from where you sit and, the issues that sort of, your foundation is dealing with?
I agree with her, but let me take you just slightly a little bit back. And I'd like to quote a gentleman called Frantz Fanon, The Wretched of the Earth. He was a psychiatrist, but they were sent from the French to go and treat Algerians during the Algerian War for independence. And he says that there's no shortage of mental illness within the colonial situation. What I mean is this, that this country has had a really brutal history. So from the colonial period to bouts of, terror that we experienced, the Wagala massacre, the 1969 massacre in Kisumu. We're talking about just a lot of trauma and injustices across huge part of this country. Nairobi in itself could look like a detention center if you look at informal settlements.
It was a detention center.
Exactly. Informal settlements, look at the state of people are living there, So then you find that some of these things are pacified by times of peace and when there's no crisis. But when a small crisis comes like this, then we see an explosion of mental illness. And then we want to blame the pandemic. The pandemic is only telling you what you had not addressed before the pandemic came. For example, I come from Kano Plains. In 2020, we had one of the worst floods, affected about 80 million Kenyan shillings in terms of damages. Now, we can blame the floods that came, or we can say, why didn't we create the pathways for the water to flow that doesn't disrupt lives, So I agree with Gathoni, and I think that what I'm passionate about in my organization actually is linking governance with mental health. Mental health is a governance issue. Because remember, the number of psychiatrists who are employed in hospital is directly proportional to the budget-making process and the money we allocate to that sector. If we talk about level 2 or level 3 or level 4 and different levels of hospitalization in this country, when there's no medication, there are no psychiatric nurses. When we have misdiagnosis and stuff like that, then it stops. It's just a medical issue, but a bigger chunk of it is a governance issue. And I think that's what my organization is trying to do by trying to bridge that gap.
That's just about the tribe.
Yeah.
Yes. What concerns you, and what is make you not sleep at night? I'm not suggesting you don't sleep at night, but what does keeps you awake in that sense, in figuring out sort of like a global view in terms of country, what our questions and the problems of mental illness?
Thank you very much, James, for the question. So in terms of what keeps me up at night, or rather issues around mental health, is one of the reasons which made me establish my initiative, which is the Mental Wellness Project Africa. One of the things that we have in this country is a gap in terms of legislation and policies around mental health. When it comes to the current Mental Health Act that we have, the Mental Health Act is from 1989, which dates back, and it's a direct replica of the English Mental Health Act. So if you look at that particular act and you compare with the situations that we have today, you realize that that act is extremely outdated, and it does not address the current issues that we have currently. For example, right now we know we are very conversant and we are very sensitive around issues of human rights. The Mental Health Act brings in the issue of substituted decision making, where a person with mental health cannot be able to make their own decisions. There's also the aspect of involuntary admission against the patient's will. What is the threshold in terms of that? When it comes to involuntary admission, what are some of the factors that we need to consider? Moving on, we have the issue around the Constitution. Article 43(1) states that every person is entitled to the highest level of healthcare. When we look at that, we realize that we are only factoring in physical health care, but we are not factoring mental health care. Yeah. Because if that translates to that, because it's not just all about the healthcare it's all about the facilities. If we look at the mental health facilities, we only have about, I think, 27 counties which have mental health facilities. We have Mathare, which has been there since 1911, and it's extremely dilapidated. That is an issue of the hospitals. Another thing that we also have is the issue around we Kenyans. I think one of the problems that we have is over legislation but no implementation. So when it comes to the mental health policy, we have a very good mental health policy that was drafted in 2015 to 2030, which addresses some of the key issues, having multi-sectoral approach in mental health, but that's not being done. We also have the aspect of going back into alternative medicine. That's also not being done. And it was drafted in 2015. We're in 2022. there's no implementation whatsoever. Also, another thing is the issue of suicide, which we have just started talking about. We have the penal code, which criminalizes suicide and says that if anybody is found attempting suicide, is guilty of a crime. Going back to all the statutes that we have as well in law, where we talk about how we refer to persons who are going through, who have mental illnesses. We call them insane, lunatics. Already, that's already creating a stigma in society, because those terms are derogatory. Even if you look at Swahili, how do you address somebody with a mental health problem? You call them mwenda wazimu, akili pungwani, you know, such names, even in your mother tongue. So if you start looking at the root of this issue and how to address it, there are so many areas that we need to look into. And actually, that is what keeps me up at night, looking at the policies and how we can actually improve areas around mental health.
Let me jump in, James. You know, it's only in Kenya where, okay, so you, assuming any of us here tries to have, I mean, God forbid, there's a heart attack here. Well, where are we rushed to? Probably Nairobi Hospital, Kenyatta, whatever.
Yeah.
But if you attempt suicide, where you rush to? Most likely, when they take you to the hospital, you're going to end up in the police. It's only in Kenya that last year's statistics around suicide were released by the DCI, not the Ministry of Health. But we don't think that it's outrageous, because when we have malaria cases, we never see the police releasing statistics. We never seen the police releasing statistics around hunger. Oh, you know, 1,000 people are malnutrition. Well, are you know. So when we talk about the penal code, so we need to look at that. I was part of the technical working group by the Ministry of Health that developed Kenya's first suicide prevention strategy. And that was a major issue, decriminalization of suicide. So I think the media needs to highlight that more, beyond just making it more, because people are asking why are we decriminalizing it? Because if we decriminalize it, it may increase. But if we remove the penal code, then people who are at risk will get treatment, and there'll be resource allocation into preventing and dealing with suicide, which is just a tip of the iceberg in the entire mental health landscape. That's what I wanted to.
Let's talk a bit about the question of stigma, because it's at the center of, you know, this problem or this question, and the fact that we, you know, as Lynette clearly says, we have used the wrong terminologies. We still have, you know, sort of outdated, you know, legal regimes to handle, you know, mental health. The question of stigma, you know, and the fact that even in our own sort of cultural sense and setting, it's non-existent. How do you start dealing with things like this?
What I would say, creating a lot of awareness. I like that the conversation about the penal code has come, and I would like to recognize that there's a lot of work that is going into that. You know, it's not just, as we speak right now, there are measures, there are meetings that are being conducted to ensure that suicide is decriminalized and people are able to get proper treatment. So looking at the penal code and even use of some of those words like imbecile, you know, that just propagates stigma. It makes it worse and harder for individuals to actually, you know, be able to access care, because accessing care, then it means, you know, that person is deemed mogoroki, you know, like for lack of better words. So tackling stigma, beginning from a systemic issue, tackling stigma from an educational perspective, where we are penetrating the schools, we are also penetrating the workplace, you know, to talk about these things, to normalize a conversation around mental health, then that is going to increase access to treatment. And I genuinely believe that if we have proper information and better access to treatment, then I think that could also translate to lower cases of admission and a more healthier nation and a more healthier community.
Tanish, the question of, you know, getting access, you know, and having facilities is all well and good, and I think you rightly pointed that's a governance issue. There's also a question of, you know, being your brother's keeper, which I suppose what you're trying to do. How do you make sure this is something that is inculcated, if you like, in our day-to-day life, in our professional settings, in our home settings and that sort of thing? Because that will almost be like the first level of you know, sort of helping and sorting ourselves, and we don't do that.
We actually, in my opinion, I saw a story of that we tell men to open up when Will Smith opened up, when you know, there's this meme making rounds, you know. And I think we only want people to open up so that we can have points of gossip and for morning radio talk shows. But we really...
You feel that for you?
I think that's the honest truth, because really, some of us have opened up and we've been ridiculed and criticized and called weak men. People have made fun of you. Why are you exaggerating your issues? We go through a lot of issues. You know, it's like we lack the capacity to empathize and say, okay, she's going through this. I may not fully understand what she's going through. So what we need, because sometimes relying on what I call communities, voluntary communities, may not be effective. But there are already structures like churches, religious institutions, the mosques, we have schools. If we are able to equip them with the skills so that then they are part of the community, because, you know, as Lynn rightfully puts it, there's an entire, under the World Health Organization, something called Quality Rights, where they're promoting for what we call the recovery model, where they integrate mental health within the communities. If we do that, listen, James Smart, your grandmother played a very important role in just dealing with all these fundamental issues, you know. Just having that fireplace within the community in the evening when we tell stories and watch the stars, you know, those are very, very important. And it means that we need to simplify mental health so it doesn't look like it's an elite conversation that only people who can speak good English suffer from it, as it's been made, because we usually think that it's a rich man's disease, and make sure that then we demystify it and make it relevant to the lowest levels of our community so that then we can thrive.
Yeah, is it a rich man's disease?
Allow me to add on the brothers, being your brother's keeper.
Yeah.
As much as we do encourage a lot of people to open up, and people are opening up, I don't think we prepare people enough to receive that information.
Yeah.
So we are out here saying, you know, men need to open up, they need to speak up. But I keep posing these questions to people around me. You as a wife at home, when your partner comes and breaks down in front of you and tells you, I cannot be able to do this, what is your reaction? Because that reaction right there is going to send a message, whether this person feels safe enough to be able to open up, or you're just going to shut him down. So I think it's also both ways, encouraging people to open up, but also trying to teach people how do you handle that person when they're having suicidal ideations, when they have stressors at work, and just humanizing them and just realizing that, you know, we are all human beings. At the end of the day.
Yeah, how do you, I mean, Danish got the point of, you know, how our grandmothers and the social setting was helping. Of course, we have our settings today. We have Twitter and other places where we congregate to discuss these things. What do you feel about that?
Wow. I really think that we need to create, in terms of, I feel like we don't have a proper, like a safe space where people can actually air out their views, because I feel like there's still, like, as we had talked about, there's still that element of stigma everywhere. For example, if I come out and say on social media and say, by the way, I have bipolar disorder, or I am depressed, or I have this, or I have this, then you'll find people coming in with different comments. Oh, maybe she's depressed because she wants to use her issue around mental health to avoid accountability in some of her issues. So those are some of the conversations that actually people have. But what I feel is that, as much as that Danish said, when we have our mental health issues, the first point of contact is very important. Who are we telling? Who are we talking to? Who are we airing out our issues to? Is it a safe space? Is it an issue? And I'll go back to issues around suicide. Most of the people who actually die by suicide have attempted this thing, not once, not twice, but so many times. And the reason that they have done this and have not opened up is because they're not sure the person has a safe space. So I'll bring this back down and say, for us to be able to create a safe space, we need to have something called a holistic approach towards mental health. So for example, when I talk about a holistic approach, what exactly do I mean? When it comes to schools, are we incorporating issues around mental health? We have PE, physical education, and I remember I dreaded it seriously. We have physical education, but do we have mental wellness? Are we explaining to our children what exactly mental wellness is about? In school, why are we using our math teacher, quote, 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 to become our psychologist? Because the first thing is I will go tell my math teacher my problems. The next thing I know is that the entire staff room knows my problems. So schools, are we investing in issues around mental health? Number two, workplaces. Another thing that people need to understand is that we don't come to the workplace when we're 100% okay. Some of us are dealing with trauma at home. Some of us are dealing with so much. So even if I'm coming to my workspace, it's not that I'm just coming to slave my day away and then I go back home. What measures has my workplace put in point to be able to deal with these issues? So do we have mental health policies in our offices? Do we have employee assistance programs where we bring in mental health practitioners to try and have these conversations with people? You know, in our communities, are we training the community health workers or health volunteers who we have, because they're very well respected in the community? And I know the Ministry of Health have a community health strategy that was supposed to start training people on mental health, but I'm not sure where the progress is on that, especially. Right. But those are some of the issues that we need to look at. Who is our safe space? Who is our first point of contact? If we're going to this person, are we sure that whatever it is that we share will actually be kept in secret, or will be put in anonymity and somebody else will not be able to hear my problem? You know, those are some of the issues that we need to actually look around so that people can actually find it easy to open up.
I think perhaps this is right, Ali. You know, if I have an issue, should I go on Twitter and, you know, announce it? You know, so sort of like a safe space. Would you advise that professionally?
I genuinely don't think Twitter is a safe space per se. In my own experience, you know, there are always bullets flying across. They are what we call the keyboard warriors. And what we don't recognize is that when people come out and talk about their most intimate part of their lives and their needs, they have probably tried it in their safer, more intimate environment, and it has not worked for them to go to that extent. And it's just really, really unfortunate and lack of empathy completely when they do open up on social media and then end up getting, you know, a backlash, or even people being pushed to the edge, you know, being given ideas, no, just go ahead, you know, we are giving you time. That just goes to show you what kind of a people we are, yeah? By the way, there were these statistics that came out that showed that Kenyans, out of 177 countries that were assessed, that Kenyans were first, number one, in bullying. Imagine,
we're bullies.
Online bullies.
We knew that, we did a study, we knew that already.
So as much as we are talking about all these things that we would like to do, we would like to see from the government, from the hospitals, you know, governance, and those are very good points. I really genuinely feel that also personal responsibility really plays a big role, and that's where the community healings also come, you know, it comes about. Danish talked about the roles that the grandmoms played. When you look back into the community, when men came back from war, they were actually not allowed to go directly into the family. They were cleansed, taken through a process of rituals and chanting and feasting, you know, and being talked to. And that in one way actually is a way to try and even distress this individual before they go right back into their family, just carrying all this load. And just allow me to say this, but when you look at the definition for mental health, the last part of it actually talks about, you know, and contributing to the community. And that's one of the things that we are not really being able to do, at least effectively. It's just me until something happens to you, right, to your family, to your child, then you realize, oh, okay, then I need to do this, or I need to talk about this. Yeah, so personal responsibility is very important. And if I can add, sorry, in regards to mental wellness, I think because of stigma and everything and the traumas and everything that we have been through, as a people, we don't prioritize mental wellness, like just doing that thorough check on yourself. Yeah, it goes mostly to worst case scenario. Then right, that's when you want to reach out to a psychologist or even to a psychiatrist. But if we try and address some of these issues as they crop up, you know, throughout life, then I think
it
that
will be in a better
contributes
place.
to overall
Right.
well-being.
I want to come back to that, to the personal responsibility and what we can do, and your own personal experiences with mental health, and how do we, have this sort of personal initiative when we have these sort of moments, and just for general public, the wellness of your mind. Well, we're number one in bullying. Taking a short break with all due respect. Let's calm down and sort this when we come back from the break.
Subscribe to Classic Bouquet on aerial decoder for 899 shillings or Smart Bouquet on satellite for only 999 shillings, or you can watch on the Star Times On app. Star Times, home of the Africa Cup of Nations 2021.
Everyone is asking me how to make it big. Sometimes you need to step back, focus, and find your own power.
Like using my skills?
Yeah, man, like focusing on what makes you unique.
Using my skills and playing smart. Yeah, that's right.
Opportunity can be in front of you.
Use your skills and stand a chance to win big with our 500% win boost. This advertisement is brought to you by BetPower.
There's this notion that golf is difficult.
If there is one thing that you will pick up from golf, it's patience, persistence, and focus.
Advice that I'd give to people who want to start playing golf is to start.
And I assure you, you'll be addicted before you know it.
The First Lady.
We have signed an agreement which says that if Mariano doesn't come back, neither do we. We are sticking to it.
What is this meant to be, huh? A syndicate?
I just wanted to help you out.
But I never asked you for help.
Sandra, why do you think Diego came to see you? Because you didn't show him any interest.
That woman is going through challenges selling corn cakes to survive, and my shameless cousin, the same one that you are backing, doesn't even want to show up. Ay, Federico, what can I do about it? Look for professional help, a family counselor.
I want to keep my job because it's important to me. You want to hang out with a rich girl so you can play wealthy.
Loma, shut up. You don't know what it is to struggle in life. You've never been there.
The First Lady.
Kuwa smart na ujaribu Zenka 0% loans for first-time borrowers. Zenka, smart loans for smart people.
Scoring has been something of an issue for Sevilla this season. Second on La Liga table, while ranking only 6th for goals with 34 from 22 games. Which, added to Sevilla's desire and need to sign Martial, who has been aware of the club's interest for some time. Almost exactly a year to the day he was fired by Chelsea, Lampard agreed to be Everton boss, replacing Rafa Benitez on a 2.5-year deal. All the news and analysis of European football on The Football Review.
The governor of the county government of Busia, His Excellency Sospeter Odeke Ojamong, is pleased to announce to all property owners a 100% waiver on all outstanding interest and penalties on land rates valid from 26 January to 30th April 2022.
Welcome back. With all due respect, we're at the point of how do we deal with bullies, cyber bullies, and that sort of thing. Just going around the room, and there's no correct answer with this. I don't know. Let me start with Danish. Perhaps Danish has more experience being on air and being a journalist. How do you deal with cyber bullies personally?
I rarely write. I stopped writing, James. Remember, I used to be a very good writer. And
used to write a lot.
Exactly. I stopped writing. They called me all sorts of names in the comment section. I remember one time, somebody who was sitting next to me in the office wrote a very mean comment. And I said, why couldn't you just come and tell me that, Yeah. So I said, my heart is fragile and small. if they just crush my heart into fine powder, it's my mother who will be heartbroken. So let me just keep off Twitter, keep off writing, and perhaps just be myself. But I wanted to say something that before we went on a break. Corporate world, we cannot, you know, pathologize mental health out of bad working places. Like, for example, if your employer, the best mental health care for employees is pay them well. Don't just say, oh, we're going to give you guys 1 week of, you know, mental health break, but you're paying people peanuts. I have a friend of mine who had to go back home with the family during the pandemic, you know. But we keep on talking about mental health as if it's not about the working environment, the kind of boss you report to. Are there structures in this organization? Are we doing job rotation? Are we doing job review? Last year, we traveled across this country under the partnership with ICJ Kenya and Njonjo Mwes. And Njonjo was a human rights lawyer. And we sat with different journalists and human rights defenders. And the biggest cause of mental health stress is, apart from being at home, is the workplace environment. You know very well how it is. So even as we talk about this, let employers stop bullying people.
Just to...
As you answer that also, tell me how you deal with, you know, personally cyber bullies as you answer that.
Well, let's just say social media is not a nice place to be in. But personally for me, of course, doing all this mental health advocacy, there are a bit of horrible comments thrown at you left, right, and center. You know, you're trying to get attention, etc. and all that. So it gets, for me, I use the block button. That's simple. You come at me, I block you, and I'm like, I don't want you in my space. You are toxic. So that's all I do. I block you, and I move on with life. Sometimes I take my phone and I'm like, I feel like throwing in a word or two, but then I'm like, oh no, it's not worth it. So just block and move on.
Block and move on.
Block and move on.
What do you do, Kadoli?
Avoid, 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 avoid. I mean, it's really unnecessary to try and get into an argument with somebody who you don't know what their state of mind is, what their frame of reference is. So you here with your sobriety, you know, you woke up well, you're feeling good, you want to engage in a conversation with another person who you're not at the same level. You know, you're doing yourself an injustice. But professionally speaking, I must say that, you know, it's just a form of projection, you know. I mean, for somebody to actually be or have that level of malice, that just goes to show you how their internal frame of reference is. If they are feeling so bad, so much so, they want to make the other person also feel the same way.
Feel worse.
Yes, or feel worse.
I think I do the same. I try to avoid, but I'm operating principle. Majorly think is opposite. If you come at me, I'll burn down your village. It's as simple as that, right? Every once in a while, but you know, exceptional cases. But yes.
Sorry, I really want to say that the employee assistance programs, actually, if organizations can get to a space where they have employee assistance programs put in place, then that actually goes a long way into setting proper structure, not just even paying and how employees should be paid, but how should they be treated in the workplace if there's a case of mental illness per se, what is the correct procedure to address. And also it puts a clause that if this person has been working for you for this period of time and they have, you know, given their time and resources, then also treatment is also part of taking care of this employee to show that you really care about this. So for organizations that, in fact, what we should be talking about is like a government directive that all organizations should have EAPs put in place. And also attached to outsiders consultants, because just like the school, if you go and tell your HR or, you know, your supervisor that this is what is happening, you know, some things can also become murky in that, you know, workplace. People also talk, you know, those are things that we know. So if they are attached to other external mental health practitioners, and that could also really help individuals both deal with what is happening in the work environment, but also their own issues, because you're not only one part of a human being, you're holistically one individual. All those things, you're going through all those things.
Danny, I saw a comment, and during, I think, last week and this week, that the response to death by suicide, especially when it happens to famous people, like it happened a week or 2 weeks ago, is that everyone is like, you know, let's take mental health seriously. And someone was like, but men just want to provide. No one is speaking about the question of resources and the economic situations that men have, for instance, stressors. And that struck me as a conversational point, is it not?
Exactly. By the way, I knew the gentleman, went to the same school, worked together, and it was really a really shocking thing. But the truth of the matter is that when you talk more about economic status of people, like for example, if you come home today and you have nothing to provide to your family, that's the place, especially for men, because then subtle expectations. You know, I say that men are the only human beings who are brutalized to be men. So things are done to you, and things are said to you, and the expectations are loaded on you so that you can become a man.
It doesn't happen to women?
I've never been.
Okay, we have exactly. They'll speak for themselves. Please, yes, but finish.
No, but my point is this: what I'm talking about is the subtle expectation on men. It's incredibly heavy. That's the honest truth, and you're only seen up to the level upon which you can provide. Beyond that, people write you off. So
if a man can provide, then
you're going to be in trouble. I'm telling you the truth, because we have had a vlog with a very good friend of mine, who was a journalist, Chito, from Kiss, and we had this called Manspective, and we got incredible, that we also did a survey in Nairobi last year, about 450 men from 9 constituencies, and the question we asked them, how do you feel about this thing? The biggest thing is subtle expectation for a man to be a particular type of way. But now the responsibility is for them. If these things that are put on you are crushing you down, why then don't you break out of that mold? Because it's possible for a man to say, I will not do that by then. And if you want to judge me, it's fine. Judge me, but I'm going to leave, because then when you die and we put the flowers and we move on, really, it's your dreams and your hopes that are cut off.
Yeah, it helps us here. The subtle expectation that men, it's put on the boy child. Is it a real thing or a created reality? Do you think it's a point of view that we should sort of open a discussion on it?
Yes, it is, because going back to the WHO statistics, actually not WHO, World Bank statistics, the suicide mortality rates are 6.1 people in 100,000. But for men, they have a higher risk, which is 9.1 per 100,000 people. So what that tells you is that actually men are at a higher risk of dying by suicide as compared by women. And one of the reasons is that, there's the stereotype, or rather the expectation, that first of all, number one, men are not supposed to be seen as vulnerable. Men are not supposed to cry. Men are not supposed to show their weak side. So what happens is that you as a man, you are so burdened, you are going through so much, you don't have an outlet. So what that does to you is that actually you keep it all inside, it builds up. The next thing you know is you hear maybe somebody attempted suicide or died by suicide. Yet this person, when they could have been able to open up, they would have actually gotten the assistance that they needed. So I feel like if you look at it, and unfortunately that's where we women, I would say we have an advantage over men, is because we as women, we have been created, or rather we are seen as emotional beings. So if I come out and say, by the way, and if you look at even statistics, even on social media, or some of these influencers, so-called influencers, or some of these people, most of the ladies will come out and say, oh wow, it'll be easy for them to come out and say, by the way, I have been dealing with depression, I've been dealing with anxiety, I've been dealing with this, and currently I'm seeing a therapist. But for a man to actually come out of the space and say, you know what, I'm dealing with these issues and this and that. So my issue is, yes, we have that, but as men, how are we trying, as men, how are they trying to create support around, sorry, as men, how are we how are they creating support around themselves? I've been seeing there's something called, is it Man Talk? Yeah. Where men come together and, just discuss some of their issues and get the support that they need. For women, it's very easy, because we have a charmer. We will go sit with a charmer with our cup of tea, and we will vent, and we will go back home, and we will feel okay. But for a man even to get to a point where he's equally vulnerable to even his friends or his closest people, it's a very difficult situation. So I feel like we need to actually normalize, especially if you're men who are close together, who are in groups. I mean, find time and call your friend and ask him, how are you? And not just the how are you, fine, how are you doing? have a sit down, get to talk to these people, get to understand where they're coming from. Because as women, if I'm having a problem, I'll take my phone and call Gathoni, and I'm like, Gathoni, you will not believe what happened today. And I'll go on a rant for like 20, 30 minutes, and I won't let her talk. And even before she responds to me, I know as much as she doesn't talk, she's a safe space, because she's somebody I can speak to. Even if she doesn't have the solutions, she will listen, you know. But for men, you don't have that outlet. So it piles up, it becomes unbearable, so you don't have a release. So the next thing you know, you just go and do something drastic.
Danish wants to completely disagree.
No, I really agree with her. But those are the symptoms. Yeah. What men struggle are what I call structural inequality. Like, for example, James Matt. The rate of incarceration between men and women, men make up 80% of those who are incarcerated. True. But we say men are privileged. The rate of fatal road accidents, 80% of men die through road accidents than women, but we say men are privileged. Rate of homelessness, a man is likely to be homeless 5 times more than a woman, but men are privileged. Why? Because we have this small, super elite class of men who own a lot of wealth, and then there's the rest of us down here who are carrying the weight of those few men, and we can't breathe.
Who are these elite people?
And we can't breathe. The 1%, the super wealthy 1% of men. Majority of men are just ordinary people who are trying to make it work. And then now, because of the expectation that is created, and these are structural inequalities, we have got to break it out. You come to the society, a man, you know, Kwetu, I'm Luo. So Kwetu, a man must build at the gate so that when thugs come, it's the man you meet first. Then I will die. Then you ask, why do men die? It's this expectation. I come home, what have you come with? Daddy, what have you brought home? One day I can't just come and say, oh, I just want a hug. And we'll be accepted like that.
Please help us.
Well, I do agree with, you know, with some of what they're saying. You know, but the question is, like, whose responsibility, you know, is it, if not for the men themselves, when they sit together, that they have that safe space
but
for
you've had
themselves?
It's only 1%.
They do understand each other. Because men are always going to watch soccer together. Men are always, you know, like
platforms
in
to talk.
Groups. you don't need
escapism platforms.
Yes,
we escape into football, we escape into drugs, we escape into alcohol.
And that's another thing, all right? Instead of addressing issue, because this conversation is about mental health, I think also one of the other things is that instead of the issues that people are going through or men are going through being addressed, then looking for a way to escape, whether it's the soccer or it's substance abuse or risky behavior, then that route is likely to be taken. Because also when you go back to those very same statistics, the number of women who attempt suicide is actually higher than men. So if it's about issues, then we can say there are also more women who are affected. The only difference is that the route that men take, you know, where suicide is concerned is much more harsher, much more brutal. So they are more likely to die by suicide, you know, than women. But the issues, I would say they are generally more like the same, but how we deal with those issues is what actually brings the difference. And then there's the thing of the self-concept. Like, how do you view yourself? I guess that the community and the society can have all these things, all these expectations, but how do you internalize
but
that?
Practically speaking, surely, for real, if you are, you know, having difficulties in providing, that is not just a reflection of the society or anything. You feel it and you know it. And this is a weight that, you know, it's on you.
I understand that, James, but you also know that you have done everything that you can to provide, and just because you cannot be able to provide today does not mean that you're not going to be able to provide tomorrow.
That is
James, I agree with Gathoni. And I suggest that on the 14th of February, when we're having our annual conference, we need to invite women. And we sign an MOU.
Yes.
So when I come home without food, just accept me the way I am. Accept me the way I am. You know.
Yeah, Gathoni is a setup for sure.
Yeah, accept me the way I am.
Yeah.
But having suffered mental health issues, which were made worse because of the economic situation I was in, I know very well what many men go through. And I understand. And another thing also, James, we're being shut down everywhere. When you go and you say something, you're mansplaining. When this happened, you're doing this. We barely can talk, you know. We barely can talk. Like, a man says something and you see many undertones and you just shut down. So, and then you keep quiet. And then now, when we keep quiet and we escape into football or into alcohol or into boys club, then we say those are toxic ways of expressions. But when we legitimately express ourselves, we are not allowed to express ourselves. You've seen how boys are raised at homes. They said, be strong, you're a man. When you come back home and you're crying, be strong as a man. So one day when you've been conditioned to be strong as a man, then you're 40 years old, then somebody tells you, oh, you can cry. How do you reconcile that cognitive dissonance? How?
Gadoni says that you should just, look at yourself where you are today.
You've been conditioned since age 1, age 2, age 3 to be strong. Yes. Then somebody tells you now you can be weak and soft as clay at 50.
I agree on that. But in the spirit of conditioning, because we also have a responsibility. Yeah, like this has happened to you. Obviously, it's not about the present dysfunctionality that we are seeing, but you as Danish, I mean, you're going to have a family. You're going to have a son and a daughter and a spouse. How different? What is it that you're going to put in place to ensure that you rewrite that narrative and raise a totally different generation and heal completely from what is it that happened to you? And then we create, a new and upcoming generation. We need to get to that point of, okay, this happened to me and I need to heal, and I don't have to actually carry that along, I don't have to live that way. I don't have to be put in a box, and to be judged even as a man, okay? So I'm going to tell my son that I love him, I'm going to hug him, and I'm going to teach him to be vulnerable. But you cannot do that if you're still carrying underlying trauma. You cannot do that. It will just keep going from generation to generation.
Lynn, as you answer this, to the question of how violent this country is and our structures, at the beginning we talk about our politics and how disconnected we are from day-to-day politics. The assumption is that it's a good thing. And if you can afford it, you don't have to be the rallies, you don't have to be paid 500 bob or 1,000 bob or whatever it is. But this is a source of income for many, right? So this functionality of this country, talk to us through it as we discuss this and start winding down the question of how we address our main issues.
So Gadoni raised a very important point in terms of how do we ensure that the next generation is not faced with the same trauma that we were actually faced with as we were growing up. And she mentioned something about dealing with trauma. And that is something that I feel we need to have dealt with in all aspects of our lives, politically, socially, economically, in all aspects. So, for example, in terms of when it comes to issues around trauma, so there's something that I usually say. When we are able to determine everything about trauma or determine the root of trauma, then there'll be a monumental shift in how we address some of the issues. So because when somebody goes through a traumatic experience, then you start asking the question, what's wrong with you? But instead of asking what's wrong with you and then redirect it to what happened to you, then that's when we start having a monumental shift, which brings me back to the question of what you've asked, James. So currently I feel like politically we are a very bitter country. Because if you take it down from colonialism, where we had the Mau Mau movement, and where we had people coming to say the white people came in and, they took our land, and of course, those are some, and even up to today, we still find that those people are dealing with so much trauma because their land was taken away from them. They have no source of income. Some of them are forced to be squatters in their own land. So of course they are carrying that, that bitterness. We move on to the current economic state that we have. Even before I think COVID is more or less accelerated the situation, but if we're looking at it from a perspective where we have had immense borrowing in this country, the debt repayment is high, taxes have gone up, the cost of living have gone up, people have lost their jobs. There's that element of trauma because I have lost my job. How am I supposed to provide to for my children, for my family? I've lost my job. How do I address all this pain that I'm feeling inside? What do I turn to? I become violent. There's an aspect of gender-based violence. So as I say, politically, socially, and economically, we are a very broken country. And before we start addressing all that, we need to start finding out, okay, what happened? Instead of saying, okay, maybe, I'll give an example. You come to the office on a daily basis. We see you as James, this news anchor who's reading news and, looking very good, looking very presentable.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. And then Somebody doesn't know what you're feeling on the inside. Somebody doesn't know what you're going through on the inside. So you come here, you read your news, you go home, and people are like, wow, he read the news, that sounded really good. But this person is dealing with so much. Maybe he's at home, people have lost jobs, so you have like 10 or 15 people depending on you. The salary that you're making cannot even barely sustain you and your immediate family. You're dealing with so much. Maybe people say gender-based violence is mainly addressed towards women, but also men face gender-based violence. Maybe you go home and you find your wife is very abusive. Those are some of the elements that you're dealing with. So when somebody sees you behaving in a certain way, maybe in order to try and deal with that trauma, or you develop a response to deal with that particular issue, the first thing they'll be like, what's wrong with you? Why are you behaving the way you're behaving? What's the issue? You know. And then instead of you asking, why is it that James is behaving the way he's behaving? What could be the reason, or what could be the underlying issue that he's behaving the way he's behaving? So I feel like those are some of the issues that we need to address. And I usually tell people, therapy in itself will not help. Because most of the people say, oh, I have a mental health issue. I'm sorry, Gadoni, it's not that I'm spoiling business, but I'm just saying therapy in itself will not help. We need to have various strategies in how to deal with this issue around trauma.
All right.
So I feel like the first thing, number one, community. How strong is our community? How strong do we have? Do we have peer support groups? How do we support people going through issues around trauma? Those are some of the issues that we need to address. People have gone through adverse childhood experiences that have really altered the way they think and altered their mental capacity. How do we deal with that? So I feel those are some of the issues that we need to start looking at wholesomely, because my whole issue, or rather the point that I'm trying to hammer home, is that mental health is not segmented, or it's not a fragment.
I want to bring a comment here from Mwalimu Njoya. She was here and she says, I said on WDR that our education system is also schizophrenic, and I see the effects of that in my class every day. Wow. So the question isn't whether schizophrenia is real. We have to talk about how Kenya perpetuates it. But this country is very violent as we wind down, and how we contextualize this conversation, you know, that the things we're going through is not as much as it's very individual based, but also we live in a society, we live in a setup. Yeah. We have history, we are people, and it bears a significant amount of something in our minds as we wind down. And you make your final comments.
Wow. Well, the best way of healing and recovery has to be, you know, within a community. Even when you come to the hospital, as much as you're either having therapy or have been diagnosed with a certain mental illness and have been put on medication, you're still going to be discharged to go back into a certain environment, whether it's your home or your work or wherever you are. And if that environment is also not addressed, then the chances of this person actually recovering and living a more wholesome life is cut short by half. Okay, so really hammering the point that, you know, I do agree with what Lynn is saying, that it needs to start at the grassroots level. It needs to start within the community. These conversations need to start within our family, you know, our family setup, us talking to our children, to our spouses, creating those safe spaces as well in our own work environment. But as a country, as a nation, we have a lot of healing to do. You know, every time I always think that we are doing so well as a country, we are loving each other and our neighbors, and then election comes and everything is back to square one. You know, we are all of a sudden divided, you know, in tribal lines, and it's really sad to keep seeing that, but that actually tells you that we are traumatized.
We're traumatized people.
Yes.
Danish, 30 seconds.
I'll make a quote. Levels of mental distress among communities need to be understood less in terms of individual pathology and more as a response to relative deprivation and social injustice. We've got to fix our communities and make them socially just and give opportunities. Like what we're doing right now as the Wellness Tribe, we're creating what we call Jitunze Community Centers. Organic agriculture farm is right now going on in Nyando as we speak right now. We've done our fourth harvest, and we're doing longitudinal studies of people's response, emotional response as they go along, because we're also very big on research. And we're seeing incredible amounts of recovery when people have something to do, money to earn and something to put in their stomach.
Okay.
Now that maybe should be the bottom up.
Bottom-up approach.
Yeah.
My director, Charlo, insists you have 30 seconds. The final, absolute final word.
No worries. Mine is just to say something. My takeaway, what is not addressed is recreated. So if you do not address the issues that we have right now around mental health, from a policy perspective, from a personal perspective, from a educational perspective, all round, it will be recreated. So that's my takeaway.
All right.
Yeah.
Lynn Etemesi, thank you very much for coming. Please come again and again.
Thank you.
It's been a long time. Please come again.
Good
And
to
don't
reconnect.
build your house in front of the homestead. Please.
I'll build it behind the homestead.
Behind the homestead. Let someone else do that.
Exactly.
And of course, Gather Mboga.
Thank you.
Appreciate a lot.
This was an honor.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. That's the questions we've been dealing with tonight. And yes, please seek help if and when you require it. But we all realize that mental health is something that we all have to do. Mental wellness, if you like, something that we all need and all have to do. There's no shame in that. We do this every Tuesday in this station, the same time. My name is James Smart. Please have a lovely night.